there was a program called Coach Approach, which was introduced there, where you are bringing in coaching principles in everyday conversation between a manager and his team.
As opposed to the old archaic supervisory. Be the nuisance over here, but you're kind of able to, push me back and keep me at bay. So let me try.
No, thanks for that. But when you say you're a true HR leader, now you don't even know whether it's a compliment or it's like your ass, whatever as it gets.
Let me ask you then, what is a true HR leader in your view?
A true HR leader or a true talent leader is somebody who can enable people to achieve their full potential. An aggregation of behaviors. Many people find it difficult to figure out what do you mean by culture when you say culture.
Right.
Do you even know what you're speaking about when you say culture is a question that often gets asked about?
Yeah.
To keep it simple, at least for me to understand it, I've said that culture is a result of the behaviors that individuals bring to a collective.
That's what I meant, the manifestation.
Yeah, it's my behavior, your behavior of our peers, of everybody in the organization comes together. That's the culture of the place. So if you want to change culture for the better, let's say, you have to change these behaviors.
Yeah.
How do you change these behaviors?
Right. Welcome viewers to The Missing Link with Amit. This is where we decode leadership, invest in complexity, and share experiences that help all of us grow and work. Today's topic is HR. Is it a nuisance or a navigator? They say HR is the function that rules all that fun, with forms, frameworks, systems, processes, performance appraisals, combined data and algorithms, behavioral trainings, cultural coherence and whatnot. And of course, finally, the dreaded colored slips. Now, is that a myth or a reality? My guest today is someone who has been busting this myth for over 2 decades. Tony Mathew Jose, welcome to The Missing Link with Amit. Welcome, Tony.
Amit. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Tony is currently the head of HR at one of India's most exciting EV energy startups, where he is helping power not just batteries, but execute bold people strategy. Before that, he was a VP at another startup, steering talent strategy and analytics, which is HR speak for building a team that doesn't fall apart under pressure. Tony is an XLRI Jamshedpur alum from the 2002 class and someone who has seen HR evolve from the compliance cop to a strategic co-pilot and has helped drive that evolution himself. Tony is also the kind of HR leader who can talk systems, thinking, business strategy, and human behavior, all while making you forget you are technically in a HR conversation. Tony, great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Amit.
So let us settle this once and for all. Is HR a nuisance or a navigator?
Well, for one, it's definitely not a nuisance. I wouldn't agree with that. Navigator, I would in fact say it's an enabler. That's a term that I would use because you're assuming that the role of any function in an organization is to enable the success of the organization. Now, if everybody is navigating, maybe you may go in different directions. So whatever the navigation path be, or the chart, or the strategy of the organization be, HR as we call it right now, and I have a take on whether it should be HR or whether it's a different name, but it's definitely an enabler. That would be.
So what is the different name you would like it to be?
So if you look at the history of this function, and it's not even decades, much earlier, it used to start with a team called administration.
Absolutely.
It moved to industrial relations. Then it moved to personal management. Then it moved to human resources. Now, if you look at it, you hear less and less of people saying HR. And there are some who call it the people function. And for me, that still is a little too broad-based. And what we typically hear now, or what some of the more progressive organizations are actually calling it as the talent function. Because you believe that you have talent in the organization. People are not treated as resources.
Right.
It's seen as more material. It's seen as more of a accounting term.
Right.
Yeah, you don't talk about machines as resources. Why would you talk about humans as resources?
Like in your former role, you were VP talent strategy, for example.
Yeah, that's one element of it. And in fact, the first organization that I worked, and now I realize that, how way ahead of their time it was. The function itself was rechristened as talent.
Okay.
So you would be, an executive in the talent function, you would be a manager in the talent function, and the leader would be, would be the head of talent. Yeah.
So that just, brings a thought to my mind that, these different labels, for example, they're not coming from, for example, one of the best business schools that you studied in more than 20 years back. They're coming from practice. They're coming from how a company's leadership or management chooses to or decides to kind of use the knowledge, the competence of what is broadly known as HR function. Okay, like we hear about some companies having a head of HR, which is called a chief people officer instead of the HR manager or head of HR or VP or whatever it is. So we will come to that because I really want to kind of mine your mind and experience on that for the viewers, particularly how leadership and management uses, or sometimes may not be using so much, what is the potential for HR leadership. But before that, I mean, across your journey, Tony, you have probably experienced both the extremes, right? I mean, where HR is being treated as some people call the process police, okay, or on the other side as a strategic enabler, like you said. So can you share some experiences where you were in the middle of this, what was labeled as process police in some part of your career in the last 2 decades, and somewhere where you were able to function as a strategic enabler? Maybe the process police part.
Thanks for asking that. In fact, I believe if I look back at my career, I have had less of the process police role, and it's a
Oh, lucky you.
It's lucky me. Maybe it's lucky me, and at least definitely in the earlier part of my career.
Right.
And but I've had people who join in and assume, people who've joined with experience in earlier organizations and assume that the HR team here would be a process police.
So they carry the scars of
Yeah.
having been policed.
Or maybe there is an assumption that I do not even know whether they were policed.
Yeah.
And maybe there is always a assumption or a presumption that this is the role that HR has to play. And that's specifically why you're asking this question.
Yeah, because, I mean, whether it is an assumption, which plays out as a presumption for people who are, if I say, just playing with the words, afflicted or inflicted by the assumption, there is some smoke. There's some fire, where there is some smoke. It's not, I don't think that it's the individual HR leaders or managers are to blame. That's not my view. But I will check upon how you see it. But coming to the other one, the so-called strategic leader, not the so-called, the role of HR as a strategic leader. I believe that's where your experience have been mostly. Right.
And that is the expectation. That typically is the expectation when you have a function as HR or as talent with you. And why would you expect anything lesser? If you expect that they are part of the same team, that they are driving the growth of the organization, the success of the organization together with you, the expectation is set straight that you are with me for the growth. And why I speak about process or the process police part as much as, of course, there is an element for any professional in this space to be compliant, for example, with the laws of the land.
Absolutely.
For instance, in fact, it's the other way around. The senior leaders, the founders, or the CEOs, MDs that I work with or I have worked with, have had the worry that, that HR will appear as a process police. Their request always has been, can we ensure that that doesn't happen? And that's actually soothing to hear for somebody who, because we all relate to it, right? Nobody wants to be a process police in one way. Having said that, you may actually need to comply with certain rules like, would you know how many lives are there inside your building, for instance, if there is an exigency? If you do not have a system which takes, let's say, some form of entry count, saying how many people have entered, how many people have exited, in case of an emergency, and when certain regulations come in and say, are you aware how many people went in and how many people came out? Sometimes you're lost. So there is a goodness to certain processes, certain compliance that is there.
Sure. And besides the point that, not only in our country, but all over, to my exposure at least, governance is about also policing, because without policing, how do you know what you are governing is actually getting governed or not? So it's not a bad thing. I mean, how, for example, the Porsche when it came in. Okay. I mean, men and women have been there, and the challenges have been there always. But when it came in, it needs to be, monitored, reported upon, and be made part of the inculcation of different value systems and behavioral aspects. So yes, this term comes in process policing, or the bad cop, good cop part of it. But I don't think it's without reason. For example, another example comes to my mind is how we have traffic in Bangalore. I mean, it's not that everybody knows what are the rules of even driving, whether they overtake from the right or the left. There are rules, but if they don't know, if there has been no implementation and also policing, then Bangalore traffic will never improve, for example. That's the value of also policy. But let me again bring you back to this point about, you mentioned about, the top management, the MDs or the CEOs of the management that you worked with over years, and today you are part of management, top management also. But how did they impact this kind of labeling, whether as a process police or as a strategic enabler? Do you think they were responsible for these labels also to kind of, become free play over the internet or anywhere else?
I'm not sure whether they were responsible. If there is somebody who has to take accountability, then it's definitely mutual. It's not that only one side is at fault there. There is a question of what does a professional in this space bring in? That's one. Second is, again, the process. When you talk about one of the worries that people have is when process kicks in, is it because there is no trust?
Yeah.
Are you building in processes because you do not trust people? If I look back at people I worked with and the direction that came, now when you ask about responsibility, who's it? Heard this many a time saying that how do we ensure that processes are in place without conveying or and still continue to convey that we trust you?
Right.
So the attendance part, for instance, we are not doing attendance because it's not because we want to monitor when you came in or when you left. It's not about the number of hours you spend. It's not about whether you came into office on this particular day. But when you are in, there are certain things that we need to adhere to. And you need to be aware that irrespective of whether that system is in place, whether that process is in place, we trust you.
Right.
So that element is there. Is it driven from the top? Sometimes it may be conditioning that they're used to through careers that they've had, through HR professionals that they've faced. It may be HR professionals themselves presuming that this is my role. If I do a very good job of process, then that's what I'm doing right for the sake of the organization's growth and success.
I completely agree with what you say, but yet, maybe to provoke the conversation, not you per se, I still believe, in any organization, at least in not maybe the biggest, huge organizations where there are hundreds of thousands of people working, but at least in organizations where you have maybe just to have a figure, 1,000 people working, plus minus whatever. I believe that the CEO, for example, does impact a lot, because the CEO is able to also be in touch with a lot of people, as opposed to when you are CEO of a 10,000 strong or 50,000 or 100,000 strong organization. Okay, they try hard. We also have heard a lot about it, read a lot about it. So my question, maybe it's a reiteration, is that for the kind of labels that HR has got, which in my words would be just malign labels, okay, who is responsible? Yes, you mentioned as a professional, everybody is responsible because they could or may not have contributed. But yet, in an organization, it is a pyramidal form still. Okay, it may have shortened in some places, also the height might have reduced or become flattened or not, but yet it is the top management which is responsible for everything. As they say, there's nothing new about it. The buck stops at the boss's table or the desk, whatever.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, if you think about it, why do you have a function like this? It's because it's reached a particular scale and there is a certain level of, let's say, standardization and value addition that a function like this can bring in here. For example, if you have, let's say, 1 or 2 employees in your own house, and then your house expands and your number of employees, let's say, taking care of your house and your farm expands from 2 to 5 to 10 to 15. At some point, you will say, hey, I need a caretaker or a manager to take care of these people. Yeah. That may be the administration function, what we were talking about at the first level there.
Yeah.
Now, all of this, at the end of it, when there is a decision that has to be taken with regard to your employees, just because you've got employees moving from 2 to 5 to 10 to 15, will you say that, hey, it's no more my responsibility to talk to these employees? I will have only the caretaker talk to them. I will ensure that the caretaker decides for them what their career or what their role or what they should do. Or would you do that? If it wouldn't, you typically would say that, hey, it's still my responsibility.
Yeah, but if I'm living, in a palace in Qatar and I don't want to go to this place where I have the caretaker or the old English style butler, like Anthony Hopkins' famous movie, just recall, then I leave it to my butler or this caretaker manager.
That is fair. That's a very valid point. And in that sense, I will come back to your original question of, does the CEO have a say or does the CEO influence the culture? Absolutely, it does.
I'm not trying to put a CEO in the dock. I mean, I have been a managing director for many years, so I'm not even trying to, be nice to people like me or bad to them. But my point is that the CEO has to be responsible for also the bad labeling. When it is good, CEOs take credit for that. We build or I build, whatever, plural they use or the singular, but they take the credit. They're given the credit. When a company does well, everybody talks about how this great CEO was and how he, built a fantastic HR organization, etc., etc. But when things are getting the bad label, the pejoratives attached to it, are they not equally responsible?
They are. And I have seen them take responsibility. Maybe that's why I'm colored with this, and I'm consistently coming back saying maybe there are CEOs or there are MDs or there are senior management professionals who will say it's somebody else's fault. It could be HR, it could be finance, it could be any other enabling function. But there are many a CEO. Maybe it's my good fortune, and I'm not saying they were perfect, they were great and all of that. But more often than not, I have seen leaders take ownership for their people. And that's specifically why they have also a professional function supporting them. If they didn't believe in that, they would not be willing to invest or hire or spend that money, saying that, why would I need them? I can do it myself. It's really not required because
Yeah, but they can't do the policing on their own. They need a department, whether you call them the old administration or personal management or to the HR or people function, you still have a huge amount of compliance work that has to be carried out anyway, and no CEO or top management wants
that is only compliance, I agree. However, with so much information available, it's also not possible to move on and actually need an evolved approach to helping and enabling people do better. Whether it's a knowledge-based industry where possibly the cost of running the organization, a significant proportion of cost running the organization would be on just people's salary, or even manufacturing organizations, for instance. Now, see that the cost of people or the cost of investing in people resources or human resources, as they call it, is increasing. It doesn't make business sense also to not approach it from a point of view of seeing what is the best that I can do. Because if you don't have the best talent, it's nobody's asking for research or data anymore. It's very clear.
I completely agree and buy the rationale. But Tony, I hope with all your experience, you may agree that it's not always the rationale that works. I give you another example. I shift the focus a little bit from the CEOs. They can take a nice little nap. Most organizations, what I hear, what I've seen in my past, as you know, I hung up my boots now more than 8 years, but even my working days, and even today I hear from people that one of the biggest conflicts that people talk about HR in an organization is the disconnect between the functional heads, the other functional heads. They could be R&D heads or engineering or production, supply chain, finance controlling, whatever, for example, and the head of HR, or the functions per se, because it is not just the heads who work, the peers, but also their teams. There are processes, there are links, etc. So mostly, the functional heads don't like HR. Okay, and now, why do you think this happens? Maybe you have not experienced, maybe you have, I don't know.
There is always an assumption that the HR function may be this or maybe that, but that's usually based on the earlier experience you've had. And that's when I'm talking about, whether you're an existing employee or somebody who's joined in new. Sometimes they've had great experience in their earlier organization, and they assume that the same function here, whether it's the talent team or the HR team here, will be similarly approachable, friendly, understand business, or the other way around. It sometimes has to do with a little bit of empathy coming in from both sides. Yeah. So
is that natural?
I do not know the answer to that, whether it's natural. There are people who are empathetic in every function. There are people who are not empathetic. There may be people who are not empathetic in a function as HR. There may be people who are not as empathetic on the other side as well. So when you believe that HR is there to convey the bad messenger, is the messenger boy, when I want to fire someone, I don't want to talk to that person. Go and tell him, I don't like your performance. So this is what it is.
So that's when they use HR as a shield.
They believe they can use. But I would, for instance, say that that's a role that we can do jointly together if you need support.
Right.
Or you can do it yourself. I can enable you from behind, from the back end. However, it is for the respect that you give to that individual, for the fact that the person had joined you at one point, worked with you. Whether the person performed or not is a different thing. However, for the sake of respect, for the sake of professionalism, you would need to have that conversation.
Since you use the word empathy, and it's something very, very close to this domain that I spend my time in. Let me ask you a very kind of a sharper question. Do you believe that a good leader cannot be functional without empathy? Is empathy quintessential to good leadership? Do you believe? Yes?
I believe so.
Okay. So now, if you're functional leaders in an organization, whatever number of functions any organization, whether it's a services-based or product-based or manufacturing, fintech, whatever it is, doesn't matter. Okay, you have definitely an organization as an organogram and with different functions or departments, in the old days people used to call. So you have this department of functional heads. Now these functional heads, if they may not have the power of empathy, because it doesn't come from the education and the domain expertise they grow up with to become functional heads. Of course, both HR and top management could look into whether a functional head should be always a person who has the power of empathy or not. That's a different issue. Okay, maybe it's sometimes overlooked, maybe not consciously, but it is, at least in my experience, has been overlooked. More the technological muscle of a function, less the empathy is being captured by the management to select who heads that function. That's at least been my experience, largely, even from hearsay. So is that the reason, one of the reasons that they are not able to probably, they and the HR do not have a, very nice relationship or a relationship that creates value for the organization?
So if in that relationship, at least if, let's say, assume one person is more empathetic than the other, the one who's more empathetic can throw light, can share, can help that person saying, this is what I feel.
You are a true HR leader. So, fine. I mean, great.
But I don't know. So now, because we are saying is HR a nuisance or a navigator?
Exactly. So when I'm trying to be the nuisance over here, but you're kind of able to, push me back and keep me at bay. So let me try to.
No, thanks for that. But when you say you're a true HR leader, no, you don't even know whether it's a compliment or it's like your ass, whatever as it gets.
Let me ask you then, what is a true HR leader in your view?
A true HR leader or a true talent leader is somebody who can enable people to achieve their full potential, who will enable people to find their path. In fact, I believe most of us, when I say most of us, I'm not saying most people excluding me, but most of us are always in search of the ideal profession, the ideal career, or what you call your dream job, dream profession. I believe that if you hit it, you will actually work for that job for no pay. You would be happy to give money to somebody else to say, can I do that job? I'm happy to do it. I mean, you go to, for instance, kids, they love playing video games. If they could do that as a profession, they'd be thrilled about it, those kids. They'd be happy to pay somebody money to do that as a job.
I thought the gaming industry is kind of using that potential also. But I want to come back to this point that, you talked about ideal leaders, etc. But there's one word that you didn't use is the ideal role. So I come back to the point, what is the ideal role of people leader, strategic HR leader? Okay. And also, what is the ideal role for a functional head, which is not the HR function? Because these two have to work together to create value. It can't be, it takes two to tango, as they say, right? So you can't, on an organizational level, create value without the HR and the function, okay, working together. So it can't be that one has the empathy and the other not.
Yes. And thank you for asking
In
this.
reality, it may happen.
Mhm.
That's a different issue. But I'm talking about the ideal role.
Yeah. And let me get to that. In all these, in this conversation, for instance, and maybe it's not very often that this function becomes a spotlight, but there is an assumption now building up in this conversation that HR has to be very visible, has to be very loud, very assertive, very aggressive in the functioning of the organization. Not necessary. In fact, if you're not always worried about where is HR, what is HR doing, but at the same time, you have the right people giving their best, delivering their best, and the organization is doing much beyond what it had planned for in an even better manner, achieving timelines ahead of schedule, delivering even more. There definitely is something working.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's possibly the ideal role or the ideal enablement that can actually come from a function as this.
Great. So let me take you on that, Tony. I mean, you talked about this ideal role of the HR function or the leader who leads that function. Not having to be, what did you say, kind of up your face or stomp around, and rather be silent and allow systems to take over. That's an ideal role, you said, right?
That's right.
In real life, does it happen in any organization, for example? I mean, to some extent it can. That's the job of a good HR function. I accept that. But really, does it happen? When a functional leader has a problem with one of his or her team members, whatever kind of problem, whether it's the expectation of the leader from the subordinate or vice versa, I hear that they say, okay, why don't you go and talk to HR? Now, obviously, then the systems cannot take care. I mean, I can't imagine that HR is like an AI system working without the requirement of any NI, natural intelligence, by which a human being, the HR leadership, for example.
So a manager or a leader, to pick on this example that you gave, who's primed, who's come up through the right, let's say, growth in an organization structure, where HR people or HR systems or people systems, talent systems have embedded in them that this is part of the role that I do.
You know why I'm smiling? Allow me to interrupt. The point is, I have a problem with the word when you say has come up in the right.
Yeah.
No, what is the percentage of right happening in the real world?
Right, when I say what I mean.
I understand. And probably the viewers, if you wish to explain, please explain. But yeah, what do you mean by right for the viewers' benefit?
The ideal. You asked about ideal.
Yeah. But the ideal is never the reality, right?
That's exactly why we all have a job. If ideal was the reality, you didn't need it.
And I'm trying to get you into what is the role of the HR leadership or the HR management, not only the HR systems. Because in ideal world, the HR systems are working, everything is fine, hunky dory. The HR leader is always on vacation in a beach, sitting under an umbrella.
That's right.
Right? But I have never seen any HR leader, sitting under an umbrella on a beach in Phuket or somewhere. Okay, they sometimes probably go, but find it very difficult, as I know. What I'm saying is that what is the reason that the HR leader cannot go for a vacation? As often as probably, this systems all working nicely would make them go. There are constant conflicts in organizations, Tony. I mean, you can say, Amit, in your time, maybe it was there. Now in these 8 years post-COVID, there are absolutely no conflicts. Well,
my question would be, why is it that an MD cannot go on a vacation? Why is it that somebody heading supply chain or procurement cannot go on vacation? Why not the head of engineering? Why not the head of sales? Why not the head of finance? You tell me one function whose function leader is going to Phuket or wherever and having a vacation.
Can you tell me why they can't?
I thought I was asking you the question.
Yeah, fine. But let me use this.
And I said this, but I can.
I'm the host, you're the guest. Okay.
So I won't get back into that mode. Maybe yeah.
why an MD or a functional leader, not only the functional leader of HR, can't always be on vacation?
So we are all aiming to go on vacation because we are trying to build systems, processes, organizations, people, teams, which will run to their best and in the ideal situation. Whether you're in fact, let me pull back. What I tell my team, for instance, every one of my team who's worked with me directly over the years, is to ensure that they make me redundant. If they can make me redundant, I can go on that vacation. Yeah, and if they make me redundant, they grow. And if they make me redundant, I can do even better stuff.
Let me again take you on that. If your team members have to make you redundant, that's different from the HR systems and processes making you redundant.
It is the same. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
My role is to ensure that the HR system is redundant.
Okay. Sorry, your role is to ensure that?
That my function is not required.
Okay.
So why?
My function means you as an individual, the leader.
If I am leading, let's say, talent or HR or whatever the function is called, I have to consistently aim to ensure that I'm not even required as a function. Why am I required? If I'm required consistently for firefighting, I should ensure those firefighting issues are taken care of. If I am required to ensure that the organization moves to the next level in terms of people development, I need to ensure, can I embed whatever is required in each team, each function, each manager, each individual, without having me or my team there. That is the aim. Now, if I have achieved, or when I achieve that, you will have less of a situation where a manager will say, go and talk to HR.
So in 23 years, Tony, I won't make it personal for you, but how many HR leaders you know who really were sitting under an umbrella on a beach in, I don't know, Thailand or whatever?
We are consistently in a journey.
So I agree. Now, if the consistency means almost like perennially, it would mean as an argument that the systems, the best of systems, the best of processes, and continuous upgradation of them, or coming in line with whatever changes hitting the organization, etc. It does not still allow anybody to really, sit under an umbrella on a beach. Okay, that's the reality. I don't know, and I won't be personal with you because we know each other now quite well. But yet, I don't know of HR managers who are regularly and consistently on vacations. I rather know that every day they have to go to work.
I don't want to be on vacation.
I don't want is fine. That's the ideal. I want to be a non-smoker, but I've failed consistently and perennially. Okay, the reality is not my wish. The reality is what is actually happening. And I want to dig into this. I know you're a tough cookie. I cannot make you pin something else other than you yourself. You take everything on yourself, and I know you're very, very good in that. So let me try to have a different tactics on this. How would you make a functional head of any function? I'm not talking about the HR function. Okay, happily come to HR or work with HR to create value for his or her function. What do you do?
I don't have to do. They already do it.
Really?
Yes, I mean this.
Okay.
You are asking, what will you do to make a function head come to you to make their function?
Not come to you. Work with HR. There are systems anyway.
Yeah. They do.
Yeah.
Because, okay, let's assume they don't.
I would like to ask the viewers, maybe they can put in the comments, later, that what is their experience? Do you viewers really see that functional managers of non-HR functions in organizations, and I'm sure that quite a lot of you work in such functions, do you really feel so good to use the HR system and the HR leadership and the HR business partners that you probably have in your respective organizations to create value for your functions? Please put in the comment if you agree. I mean, I can't make Tony as a very proud and capable HR leader to accept that somebody else is to blame. He takes the whole onus on himself, and I really respect him.
Now that you've crowdsourced the whole grilling part, let me also put a perspective as the comments come in. Okay. For example, what I say when people own that is when let's say a function head or a team leader comes in and says, my team can do better. Yeah. And these are some of the behaviors, but I see which is not helping them do better. Can you help with that? I have tried. I have conveyed to them. Maybe the message is not going through. Maybe they need a little bit more professional help or a structured help, for example. That's one element. Or they will sometimes come in and say that I have somebody who's really good at it, who's really great, and I want us to convey that you are really important for us. I may not have the money to give the person right now. I may not have. How do I convey it to them? How do I ensure that they stick with us? Or third one is, I know here is somebody who's really great, but they're just sleeping through work, for instance. How do we take care of that? These are basic individual level questions. There are sometimes saying that I'm actually going to launch a new business. Yeah. And this is the kind of service that we want to give, or this is the product that we are going to make. What's the kind of skill that we need? What's the kind of people that we need to bring in? How do we structure it? How do we create a system that is aspirational for people as they grow in this? These are all questions that people come to HR for when they have that question.
And they come normally, and almost everybody come with these questions.
They do.
Volitionally.
Now, maybe I do not realize, maybe I'm not self-aware enough to realize that they're actually coming with a certain level of skepticism. Now, I can see that when you ask me this question, saying, why would you?
I'm trying to embody the skepticism that I hear.
That's great.
I get as feedback. I coach a lot of executives, as you know. And not that every session is about HR bashing or something, but I have been over many years, not today or tomorrow, but over maybe two decades consciously, I can say that I've been hearing most people, not from HR, kind of, if not bashing, but scratching and, tearing the fabric.
Fair. So, but if you look at different professions, there is a certain level of bias or a generalization that always kicks in. You spoke about traffic earlier of Bangalore. But you look at the traffic cops who work day in and out, whether it rains, whether it floods in Silk Board, whether it's absolute sunshine, heat, they're out there. Irrespective of the hard work that they do, my sense is that most people dislike them, disrespect them, say that these guys are out there only to give you challans and fine and do something else. If you say the word government official, there is a presumption. I'm just moving into another profession.
That the bias.
There is a bias that they're inefficient, they're incompetent, or they're corrupt. These are all so sad when...
Or purposeless.
Yeah, when possibly there's a huge amount of professionals in these who are far better than any of these speakers themselves.
No, I agree. I mean, I am fully aware.
So where I come from is, of course, each profession, whether you like it or not, has certain biases attached to it. Now, I do not know, maybe you're fortunate, maybe one is fortunate to be in that profession where people respect you. But which is that profession? Whether you take any profession, you can always have a negative attribute. Whether it's somebody, let's say, who's a technology professional, whether somebody who's in marketing, whether somebody who's in business, whether somebody who's in sales, even MDs or somebody in project management, everybody has a negative attribute to that.
Yeah, I agree, Tony. I mean, what comes to also my mind is, one of my most respected gurus, Sumanta Ghoshal, and in his research on volitional engagement, another favorite topic of mine, he worked for 6 years guiding the CEO of Lufthansa when they were, changing Lufthansa from a public company, from a government company to a publicly listed company. And his research brought out that 70% of Lufthansa managers, they knew what has to be done, but did not do it. 20% did not know what has to be done, obviously could not do it, but only 10% knew what has to be done and did it, and that was enough to turn around Lufthansa. So maybe you also kind of represent the good experience that you are sharing, for example. But that makes me bring to you, because I can't really put you on this hot seat so easily, you are tough, which is that, can you share a moment where HR really influenced business direction or enabled a strategic shift from your experience? Something that you can share, please.
So what comes to my mind is actually something that I experienced at the beginning of my career.
Okay.
So I started my career in a Big Four consulting firm around 23 years ago when they were setting up their India centers. Now they're called Global Capability Centers, GCCs. Yeah. In those days, that term wasn't there.
Can you name the firm? Is it okay? No.
Yeah, it's Deloitte, for instance.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's now it used to be called offshore development centers then, or
Okay.
ODCs. Those
Those
were the
days,
terms
yeah.
most commonly there. And Deloitte had the best of people practices, I would say, because they also had a human capital consulting firm. Or a human capital consulting division. So the best of HR practices were there because you are obviously consulting to the Fortune 50, Fortune 100, or the best of the best out there. And those practices were also internally practiced.
Right.
And with the benefit of hindsight, I realized how rich, and of course, a learning experience it is for any individual out there. One thing that happened is, as we were growing the organization, practically everybody was being hired at that point of time because it was new and we were expanding rapidly from competitors, or it was external talent coming in.
Okay.
One key message that my function, in fact, my role specifically drove was to convey to everybody coming in through the onboarding induction sessions was that you own your career.
Okay, that's interesting. Tony, can I request you to speak to the audience because
Yeah.
I think they will really absorb what this experience.
Yeah, so this concept of you owning your career was a little different for people in those days. Maybe it is still different for some here, saying it's not your manager, it's not your organization that owns it. Yeah, it is you. So if you're not promoted, please ask yourself. If you're not growing, please ask yourself. If you're not learning, please ask yourself. If you're going to come in and say, hey, I'm not learning, why, to a manager, the answer has to come from within. Now, it was a little strange as a concept, but people didn't resist it. People understood, okay, that this is the kind of organization that's being built there. But because that message or that expectation was implanted, I think it really made a difference in the fact that people...
Before you get to that, how did you implant that message?
It's through the induction, the onboarding sessions. There was a specific session on how do you build or how do you manage your career. Managing your career was a specific session that was there for people who are actually surprised, because usually in the induction session, you may talk about a performance management session where you will hear about, do you have some kind of rating or whatever, or you'll have sessions also on different functions. How do you manage your career in a firm like this was an interesting one. Also, people were coming in with high hopes, wanting to win. They were ambitious, they wanted to be successful. So they were all ears. And this left an impression. And as a result, I think, and that organization definitely continues to have people who are consistently ensuring their skills are updated, who are growing, who own that piece. And if I look at it right now, it's a great story. It's a success story. It's a great talent pool that really has emerged in India, in this part of the world, for all their practices, firms across the world, with this simple method of, or simple strategy, or simple message of you own your career, which is actually an HR message, you can argue. It's actually a management message, or it's just a people message saying, who owns it? You own it. If you own it, please take charge of it yourself. It's the same thing that sometimes you are trying to convey to children, for example. I say this because when I grew up, I was...
Before you, I just want this, my favorite label is akin to what you're describing, which is, this is like what I talk about as a volitional engagement, that you are not motivated to grow. You yourself find out how to grow, for example. So you're out of your free will.
Yes, because you're doing it for your sake.
Exactly.
Maybe my generation grew up saying that I am studying hard, for example, for the system, for my teachers, for my parents, for my family. I didn't realize it was for me. So as you study through school, through college, and then straight away you're getting a job because you studied in the right places, and then you get a good opportunity as a career. You're coming in here saying, and I'm working again for my manager. I am doing this for my organization, not for me. And the key message that you're driving is you're doing this for yourself.
Exactly.
You are learning along the way. Along the way, the organization is growing. Yeah, there is a purpose to the organization growth. There has to be a link between what you're doing and what the organization's goal or strategy is. But it's all for you. And the moment you know it's for you, the driver is very different. The drive that you have for it is very different. That's why it's a success story. I believe such unleashing of potential of people can enable significant growth. I have seen that happening in my career, in my lifetime. And that's a huge success story.
You must have seen that not only happening in Deloitte, where initially you were going through, but also in other organizations later. You might have even knowingly kind of infused it or implemented it in other organizations, right?
That is true. In fact, this was like a mantra that remained in me because across there will be a push coming in because there are people like me who've grown up and believe that, hey, the organization also has a stake in my career.
Yes.
Yeah. And you're pushing back, saying that no, that's not something. And I've shared this message with my teams, with the system itself, saying that people have to own their career.
There's another side to it. I think you touched upon it when we were just covering this topic, which is that for this principle, if I just label it as a principle, which was communicated through the induction sessions and maybe performance appraisal interactions, for any principle to actually get imbibed and practiced by each and every person, there is something somebody has to, kind of keep on peddling or seeing that, yes, it's happening. So there must be the role of those respective managers of those people. What is the role those managers played?
In fact, that's thank you for asking that, because it's not that people alone are driving their careers and then there is no system behind it. How you enable that system is to, in fact, in the organization that I was talking about, you built in so there was a concept called there was a program called Coach Approach, which was introduced there, where you are bringing in coaching principles in everyday conversation between a manager and his team.
As opposed to the old archaic supervisory behavior of managers.
So a manager traditionally would be expected to tell, and I listen. If you're my manager, you'll tell me, I'll listen to you.
Or monitor, give negative feedback, positive feedback, be done with it.
That's right. So then you own my career. You're responsible. Exactly. If I do well, it's because of you. If I do badly, it's because
also
of you.
Because of you, but I
have
accept
less of a discretionary effort that can make any difference there. Versus you come to me and say, Tony, this is the problem. What do you think we should do? Maybe I have the answer, maybe I don't. If I don't have the answer, you may guide me into saying, have you thought about this? Is that a possibility? I may say, oh, that's a great idea. I'll say, oh, no, that's not a great idea, because then what about this possibility? Absolutely. So it's a discussion and there are two minds working on it. It is what you say is how all of us as adults learn. It's in a different way. It's an extension of adult learning methodology, which now is extending even to youngsters, because we treat even the youngest of younger generation, including those who are not adults by definition, as adults in terms of how they learn. So this is embedded in managers so that these become day-to-day conversations.
But this is very, very, what should I say? I mean, on one side, this is not only exactly very close to my heart, what I believe in, and my words that I mentioned. This is how you harness the volition of an individual, harness the free will, which is that you let the person believe and actually practice that he or she is responsible for their life and careers.
Yes.
And to facilitate that, you as a manager has to practice as a coach.
Yeah.
Okay. And without that, it doesn't also happen. Like parents, for example, have to be as coaches also for their children. Then only they become, they are able to exert their free will, they understand the boundaries, etc., and all that. And also what comes to my mind is that this is still not actually, I mean, you are in this work, I tried to kind of trap you, but I failed. But you are Mr. Positivity, and I admire you and respect you for that.
Thank you.
But yet, in reality, people are not, even today, managers are not working as coaches. Even today, even the Gen Z crowd, for example, they feel they are probably, responsible for their careers and they will drive their own growth. But everybody else, we have done 3 episodes on Gen Zs and millennials, for example, and I hosted 3 different managers from 3 different domains, different experiences. But one common trend was that, yes, it's a challenge. Okay. Of course, the root cause is not the Gen Zs. The root cause is the social environment and how their millennial parents probably even brought them up knowingly, unknowingly, because parenting is also like managing. Okay. It's not something you really learn somewhere. Right? You won't have a diploma or a degree in parenting or in actually management either. Right. So coming back to, again, turning the focus on you, Tony. Now, please don't escape this one. Oh, no, you didn't escape, but I want you to really, really, really be honest with this. If a CEO genuinely wants to elevate HR from an enabling function to a business co-creator, what are the 2 things they must do?
They must expect that from HR.
Okay.
And they must trust HR to do that.
Okay. How do they make HR believe that they expect it and they trust HR. If you are the CEO and I'm representing the HR, how would you make sure that I believe your expectation or you trust me?
If I am the CEO?
Yes.
If, for instance, we are taking any decisions on people, let's say,
Yeah.
I would ask you for your view. Do you think it'll work? Will that be okay?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it'll impact our culture?
Mm-hmm.
Does it help our culture?
Mm-hmm.
These are the questions I hear from people I work with.
No, now you're the CEO, I'm the HR.
Yeah, but I'm just saying these are the questions that I hear from the CEO that I work with.
Yeah.
And that gives me strength and conviction that this is the expectation that is there.
Okay.
And sometimes refreshes my mind that this is the very purpose why I set off on this profession.
So as HR, when I respond to those questions from you as a CEO, what would make me trust that it is not just a conversation, but actually I can trust you because you believe in those things?
For you to, so maybe you should actually say it. So let's say you are the CEO or the MD, and you have said that to me. Maybe that works better because it's difficult for me to wear the hat of an MD because your questioning is on the HR part of what.
Right.
So let's say you say that.
Yeah.
And I will, let's say, okay, you know what? I don't think your idea is going to work. Yeah. If you really want the culture part to be protected, or if you want people to be treated well, this is maybe another way we can do it. Can we do it this way? You may say it's rubbish. Can we do something better because it's going to cost something?
And then you lose the trust.
No, I don't. I'll see the reason. I understand why.
Okay.
Because I have the background or the context around why this is being said. Okay, I'll figure out a way. Give me some time is what sometimes I'll say. Okay. Because it's on me also. I have to think through with the CEO or with the leader, with the organization. There are constraints everywhere. There may be constraints on money. There may be constraints on time. There may be constraints on people or certain decisions. So long as I understand and that honest information is shared back and forth.
So long as you understand and so long you are convinced.
Yeah. If I'm not convinced, I'll feed it back to you.
Rationale for going this way or that way from the CEO is in alignment with how you see things. But there could be situations where the CEO said, let's go this way, and you don't see the rationale. And I guess then you're walking out of the gates, right?
So this is something that I've heard many times from leaders that I worked with and I've read about also. So there is always this concept of the credit or the balance that you have in a relationship. So whether you are my manager or I'm your manager, when there are certain things that work well in our relationship, there's a certain set of credits that you're placing in the relationship with me. So you're building trust. I know that you do the right thing whenever required. There will be certain instances when I believe you're unreasonable.
Correct.
You're not listening to me.
Yeah.
Or you do not understand what they organize. And you will still say, Tony, I want you to get this done. I don't care. So some of those credits that I have with you may go away. Now, if that credit is still gone completely depleted and it's a negative, I may decide not to work with you.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's maybe the end of that relationship.
Yeah.
But I'm also trying to build that relationship at every point of time.
Fantastic.
Similarly, there is a credit I have with you.
Correct.
I am working hard. I'm trying to deliver what you want to get done because you are aiming for the growth and success of the organization.
Yes.
Now, over a period of time, sometimes I will come and say something stupid, which you think, or you will say that you don't understand the organization.
Yeah, humans,
yeah. Or you may say that you are a rebel. You are just not listening to what I do. I may take away those. Now, over a period of time, if it's really, really negative, we both will obviously part ways. But that relationship at that point of time, it's not a perfect relationship where this MD or CEO is perfect or the HR person is perfect. There are some takes back and forth on this.
If I draw a kind of if I separate out two contexts on which disagreements happen and should happen. After all, why do we have them? More than one person taking decisions or at least discussing the context for taking decisions. So disagreement is not the problem. Disagreement is actually probably a great boon. Okay, right? But if the difference of opinion or the conflict is on one side about the rational aspects of the business, okay, costs, processes, systems, technology, numbers, metrics, etc. That's what I mean as the rational aspects, as opposed to the intangibles, if I may use the word, not irrational, but intangibles, which is the values, the systems, the ethics. Okay, I guess if the difference of opinion between what is being discussed between the CEO and the HR leader is on the value side or ethics side, does that make it more difficult to continue? Or
Can you give me an example of what you mean by the values or the ethics side, which conflicts with the rational side of business?
okay, that's a good question. And well, I thought I had the liberty, but I will try to answer.
Yeah. So that's a difficult situation. I hear what you're asking. So the obvious answer is that it's a no-go. That seems like the absolute obvious answer, and there is. So one may even have to part ways if that's the way it is. Having said that, my experience is that whether it's a CEO or a manager or a function head or somebody responsible, sometimes these statements or stands are taken with a hope that if there is a contradictory view, that somebody will counsel, advise, or stand up for it. It's not always my way or the highway. It is, this is what my view is. This is what I think we should do.
Right.
I have a reason for it. What's your take? And that's also part of the value that this function or this individual or that I bring in there, saying that I don't think this is right or I do not agree with this. I cannot stand by you with this because these are the implications of that.
So that's what you say is very deep. I can relate to the profundity of it, because this relates to the mindset that even you have, and obviously the mindset comes from how your life has evolved. Not only also as an HR leader, but also overall. For example, it starts because there are things that your convictions are very, very solid, and nothing can shake that, for example. And this varies from individual to individual. This varies from even one CEO to another CEO, coming back to my favorite again, a CEO. So my next question is about culture. So is there a link between the top leadership's mindset and the organizational culture?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And how does HR help in creating the organizational culture despite or in spite of the leadership mindset, top management mindset?
Well, I can give you an example. What
Please.
what we spoke about earlier about this whole, the attendance piece, which you were talking about, monitoring attendance, for example. Most of the CEOs or senior professionals that I worked in the recent past have been people who said, we trust our people, and I hope this specific aspect, I don't want our people to ever feel that they're being monitored. I believe that's a part of the culture that they're already speaking when they say that.
Absolutely.
They are saying that I trust my people, and because of some process we have, I don't want them to ever feel that they're not trusted. Versus, there are people have come in and said that I actually quit the earlier organization I was in because if I reached 5 minutes late, half a day of my pay would be cut or half a day of my leave would be cut. And we know that's a reality. There are reasons for that organization to do that. And rightfully so, because it may be many specific reasons. It helps them in their business context. But it still sets the tone for culture in terms of how the organization or the people in it treat themselves. You were asking something.
You already kind of touched upon what I was about to ask, which is that what you said earlier about the leaders having that consciousness, or even I will use the word being conscientious about that. Okay. And that depends on where they're coming from. But like you went into the reality and gave an example at some company, and that kind of issue where, somebody coming in 5 minutes late is, really punitive action is taken, may also relate to the business body, may also relate to what kind of job or what kind of role those individuals function. Okay. And, but that apart, yet amongst the viewers, I think they will have many experiences where it's not about just the, punching of the attendance part of it. There will be so many other things. It is, for example, how does the top management, behave when they cross junior employees or junior managers, in the corridor or in the canteen, and, who sits on the top management's table, for example, during lunch, how many coffees do you get? I mean, there are many other issues which are not part of the woven fabric of the process and system of daily work. Okay, and I believe that that also creates a big impact on the organizational culture.
Yes.
Or rather, maybe a bigger impact is my personal belief. I would like to check upon with you. How do you see it, and how does it play out today?
I have seen that happen across places I worked. For instance, in most places I worked, for instance, one of the symbols of being senior or having made it in your career is that you have a dedicated cubicle or a corner office or a cabin, for example.
Right.
And there is a certain sense of pride associated with that, rightfully, because that's the way these systems are built.
Yeah.
And then there is also um, a certain set of organizations that have absolutely no concept of this.
Mm-hmm.
If a stranger were to walk into the office, you will never be able to figure out who's
the
junior,
boss?
who's senior, who's the boss. In fact, the people occupying the meeting rooms or the cubicles would actually be the ones who would be there because they need some quiet space, because they need to think, or they are discussing something, while the CEO or the bosses or whomever it is, whatever, would just be out there sitting separately.
But even that is not only an aspect about the leadership's belief about what to have as a culture. It's also probably to do with what is the business model, because certain business models also need, the so-called old style of working. If I deliberately label it as older style, where the corner office.
Not really. I would disagree with that.
Okay.
Why would we say that there is a corner office required for one type of business versus there is no corner office
No,
required?
not only the corner office, but what I'm saying is that, for example, today, if you have a large number of people sitting opposite desktops or laptops, there was a time, or there are still business models where a large number of employees are sitting on the shop floor or standing on the shop floor.
Yeah,
So that is what I mean as the difference in
I agree.
business models.
I agree. So yeah, of course, you've gone back really in time versus I am just
Yeah, but
looking at the.
there are hundreds of companies today who have 90% of people working only on the shop floor. I mean, the Apple factory will not have people sitting with laptops only, for example.
We
There'll
also
be an
have, I
assembly
mean, the
of this.
organization that I work in now and
Yeah.
the one that I work in earlier have people
Yeah.
working on the shop floor.
Okay.
And in these organizations also, if the argument is that people in the, if you have a shop floor thing, then you need a corner office, that it can
that's
still
not-
work.
I'm
with
not
that.
relating it
Yeah.
one-to-one on that.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that, or what I want you to rather speak about is that, like you said, that these are probably symbols of entitlement.
That's right.
Okay, these are also remnants of the narcissistic needs of the leaders, for example. Okay, and but that continues irrespective of even business models, and that's I think where you're coming to, that you could have situations where the people who are junior have the so-called cubicles or meeting rooms are occupied, for example. That's fine, but yet the manifestations, the decisions that the top management takes, irrespective of whether they sit in corner offices or not, okay, how does that impact organizational culture? One of the manifestations could be that they are not sitting in a corner office, but that's just one of it.
That's right.
And having done that, after another 6 months, nobody even thinks about that, oh, he does not sit in a corner office, because it is the accepted norm.
So culture, for me, is an aggregation of behaviors. Many people find it difficult to figure out what do you mean by culture when you say culture.
Right.
Do you even know what you're speaking about when you say culture is a question that often gets asked about?
Yeah.
To keep it simple, at least for me to understand it, I've said that culture is a result of the behaviors that individuals bring to a collective.
That's what I meant, the manifestations of
Yeah, it's my behavior,
decision-making.
your behavior of our peers, of everybody in the organization comes together. That's the culture of the place.
Yeah.
So if you want to change culture for the better, let's say, you have to change these behaviors.
Yeah.
How do you change these behaviors?
Right.
You can change these behaviors through systems.
Okay.
If you build in a system saying, or let's say conditioning system. So this system is the decision you're talking about. A decision that you take, if it's changing the behavior of more than 1, 2, 3, 4 people, for example, it's already impacting culture. And it's not like my favorite example, but again, I come back to this example of, let's say, if you're saying that if people come in at a particular time and I'm going to impose some kind of impact for people coming later or earlier, whatever it be, it can change behavior. It can impact culture.
Yeah, but I would like to, I mean, for me, it is still this example of attendance and punching.
It's very entry level.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's, for me, it's, I think it's not only coming from the old days of the industrial economy or systems, but it's also contextual and situational. But let me bring you back to a question probably I tried earlier, which is about a functional leader and the HR leader and the CEO as a triangle. Okay, you talked about decisions.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what made me think about it again. So now it is but natural that decisions have to be made where there are multiple options or multiple, possible ways to go around.
Yeah.
Now, when there's a disagreement between the functional leader and the HR leader, obviously the boss is still the CEO of both of these roles, right? And can you come back, recall an example where the way this was handled?
I can give you an example. There are. I mean, this is a classic.
Let me finish the question. My question is the way it was handled gave rise to a bad culture or it gave rise to a good culture. Maybe there are two different examples from your length of experience till now.
So
one gave rise to a good culture, a good cultural impact, and other one had not a good cultural impact. Give me two examples.
Sure, it's a classic situation you speak of. Usually, there are bound to be agreements and disagreements between functional leaders.
Yeah.
If there is a disagreement, sometimes you agree to disagree and you move on because both the functional leaders will say, let's say it's me as one functional leader and somebody else will say that, okay, if I agree with either way, it may be an agreement and then you move on. Sometimes if the decision, let's say somebody is coming to me discussing with something, I disagree with that functional leader may go to our common manager, who's the CEO, and say that, hey, this is something of a discussion. And the functional leader comes back to me and say, hey, I spoke to the CEO, our boss, and he agrees with me. So he's asked me to discuss with you. But the CEO has not spoken to me. So I already know that I have the freedom to still do what I believe is right, if it is right for the organization in my perspective. However, the onus is on me to persuade the functional leader, still to say, okay, the CEO has agreed. You have a view, but these are the issues around this which I see. Can you help me understand why this is irrelevant anymore? And I have to either agree or disagree with that individual. But where it sets from a culture point of view is there is a certain sense of empowerment that you have.
Yeah.
The buck doesn't stop at the CEO right now. The buck still stops because if I'm making the wrong decision still, in spite of the CEO agreeing with the functional leader.
Using this example, would you say that the good impact on culture happened because the CEO chose not to speak to you and say, I agree with the other functional leaders' proposal? Is that the cue? Is that the reason for creating a better culture?
Both of us, I think this functional leader and me, experienced the good impact of the culture, I will say. Because it's not like the other functional leader, when he went in, his view was respected, acknowledged, and the CEO said, I agree with you, but you discuss. The onus is still on him. Yeah. It's not like, okay, let me pick up the phone and talk to Tony and say, just get this done. So the onus is still on him. Now, the impact of our decision, maybe it's impacting other people.
Absolutely.
What is the impact of that on the culture of the organization? This is a hypothetical situation, I do not know. It may be that I was wrong and the functional leader was right.
Possible.
So there is a right decision happening here. Both of us also have to do what is right for the organization.
But the point is this, that if the functional leader's proposal was not finally gone ahead with, it is not because the CEO disagreed or they agreed. He had agreed is the example you gave. But he did not talk to Tony, say, Tony, I agree with it. Please, let's go ahead with it. He did not do that.
Because he expects that there are two
senior
professional, mature adults who have to take a decision. So let them take the call.
Yes. So now, when you gave your argumentation to your colleague, to your peer, from the other function, and if he accepts it, then only it goes the way you are proposing.
That's right.
Right? If he does not accept your argumentation, then either you have to accept his or he, or you have to go back to the CEO. So in the example I got is that you didn't have to go back, but you did not probably, what was the conclusion in this case, even if it is hypothetical?
Let's say if I didn't agree with it.
Okay.
In my mind, I would still at some point end up informing the CEO that you had a view on this, the other person had a view on this. my view was this. I've still stuck to this because these are the reasons, so that he's informed.
Yeah.
If he's empowered me and trusts me, I need to also allow him to know, let him know that these are the reasons why I took this decision.
So far, this example, would this have a good impact on the organization culture or not a good impact on the organization? Because there are people who are working in your team, there are people working in your peers, functional leaders team, okay, and others also who are watching, who are coming to know this is how decisions are made in this company. Does this kind of behavior leave behind the good impact on the culture or not?
I believe it has a great impact on culture because,
Right.
firstly, let's assume for a moment that I truly, honestly believe that the decision that I stand by is the right one.
Yeah.
I believe it with all the competence, capability, experience I have.
Absolutely.
With this conviction of what happened,
Yeah.
my team is also experiencing that when there is a stance that we take, there is a respect that is given, rather than it being superseded, it's a business requirement, or your view is not as important as somebody else's view.
Yeah.
You have a view, we respect it, you stick to it. So there is conviction, confidence that's also building across the team, saying we always have to stick to what we believe is right. Of course, we have to listen. We have to understand where it is, and we have to also justify why we are standing for that.
Yeah.
For me, and it comes back to your question right in the beginning, is HR. There was an intervention and saying just listen to what the other function head is saying. Then you are no longer going to be any navigator or enabler. You will just be somebody who's a doer.
So that brings me maybe to the penultimate question I may have, which is that it is seen mostly that HR is more reactive than proactive. Now you may disagree with that because I'm not quoting any statistics, but that's the input I have. For example, if that is true, that HR seems as more reactive than proactive, and I'm not talking, Tony, about your
No, that's fine.
your company, for example. So if that is so, why do you think that persists? Why do you think that happens? That HR is more reactive than being proactive?
Either the information is not coming in time. To be relatively proactive, I'll say, because even if the information comes in time, you are still reactive. It's a question of context, understanding the business. It's also about having expectations. Maybe there is an expectation that HR has to be proactive, while the expectation within the HR team may be that what we have to do is we have to react, respond, douse the fire.
Such an expectation in the HR team, isn't it related to the HR leader?
Possible, highly possible. And it may be related to the HR leader.
Isn't that actually the job of the HR leader, to either keep it reactive or make it proactive?
So let's pull back a bit. Now, if you step back and look at it, any team in the organization can be called as reactive. You can say that the sales team is reactive.
Yeah, sure.
You can say that, let's say, the production team is reactive. You're only making after the business is. So this argument can be had against any function.
Yeah. For sure.
However, HR is the function that impacts you as an individual. When the HR team is reactive, it impacts something very personal to you, for which you are actually waking up in the morning and going to work, for which you are building your career on. For an individual, ironically, the HR team being reactive is the worst part of it. If the business team is reacting, who suffers? It's the organization that suffers.
The P&L or the balance sheet.
I don't care about it as much as, the HR team being reactive and not taking care of my career or something to do with my development. So it's very loud out there and you make a big noise about it. Why isn't that there isn't as much noise when the sales team or the procurement team or the engineering team or the production team or any other team is reactive?
A few minutes back, I asked you the question that for the HR to be reactive or proactive, isn't it the responsibility or isn't it about the leadership of the HR leader?
I said yes.
Yes. If the HR leader is able to make a choice that I want to be reactive, I want my team and HR function to be proactive, let's say, which is a normal thing. Or in some cases, it could be reactive because they're waiting for something to happen, maybe like an acquisition or something. But let's take the normal linear thing that HR leader makes a choice. But yet, the HR is seen as reactive by the rest of the organization. Do you think the CEO has some role to play in that? That CEO example you mentioned who did not call you, under that kind of a CEO, the chance of the HR leader going his way, being proactive, more possible, or the other kind of CEO would have called and said, Tony, no, let's do that. This is what I believe.
No, rather than dragging the CEO into this,
I want to.
Okay, you can.
You can paint the CEO as, Mother Mary or whatever. I have no problem.
I have no particular idealization
but
for any
my
CEO.
question is, other than the HR leader, for the HR to be seen as reactive or proactive, other than the HR leader, okay, is the CEO responsible or not? Overall, not about one case and example.
We are all, let's say now, because you're talking about HR, it's not about me, it's not about an individual, it's about a function.
No, but I'm talking about you means the HR leader. The HR leader has made a choice to be proactive, but yet the HR is seen as reactive.
So let me continue with my earlier example where I spoke about, and that is very relevant, about any function can be seen as reactive. All functions are racing to be seen as proactive. Why wouldn't I want me or my team to be seen as the most proactive, the best performing, and the largest contributor to my organization? We're all racing against it. However, if it's appearing as reactive, somewhere I have failed.
Okay, accepted.
That is the response why immediately I said earlier that, okay, the leader has a role to play in this.
Yes, but the CEO is the biggest leader in the company.
Maybe the CEO has chosen the wrong HR person.
Or maybe the CEO is the wrong person. So we leave it at that. Because we can't prove you are right or I'm wrong here, or by other way around. So we leave it at that. I wanted to raise this topic also for the viewers because they are exposed to HR leaders and the CEOs of their respective organizations. And if they see their HR as reactive and they see in personal interaction with the CEO that the CEO is very supportive of HR being proactive, and yet the HR is reactive, then probably they will put the blame on the HR leadership. And if there is the other way around, they will put the blame on the CEO. That is where I want to leave it for the viewers, actually.
You can leave it for the viewers, but I wanted, since you are,
please,
in your own role
please,
where we have played,
yeah,
I cannot imagine any CEO who will not want his HR to be proactive.
I have no arguments against that one, but I'm not seeing too many CEOs who are so much interested in even HR.
It is not about the interest. Let's say it this way, assuming that, you have professionals, you have mature individuals taking up a role. A CEO will want all his functions to be proactive. That makes his job easier, isn't it?
Yeah, that's logic, that's rationale. Reality, in my view, maybe deliberately so because I am hosting this show, I would like to be provocative. Reality, in my view, is that it is not the rationale that works always. What about the CEOs who are very reactive narcissists? Okay,
But
so
we are dealing with people.
Yeah, you can
Each
deal,
person
but
is
CEOs
individual.
fail. Companies fail because of also the top management failing in their roles.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I take you off, or both of us, from the little bit hot seats on this. And for upcoming CHROs like you, okay, what advice would you give to HR leaders who want to break out of the system enforcer box or the process cop box? But you said maybe such organizations don't exist anymore, is it? No.
I don't know whether I can give advice to upcoming CHROs.
We will leave it at that. We will leave it at that.
Yeah.
And then probably I will come to how can young HR professionals escape the compliance mindset and become business thinkers?
I think they just have to continue to go with the passion that made them choose that profession, choose that organization. I doubt there are a lot of people out there joining an organization saying that, hey, I want to join here and I want to really have a compliance process mindset. And I want to be reactive. I don't want to be proactive. You should not let go of that spirit. Question, ask, and there will be a way out. Like we were discussing about any CEO who would want an HR function to be proactive. I think any HR leader would want in his team also to be proactive and not be approaching it from a compliance and process mindset.
Great, Tony. So I would rather address this to our viewers that was Tony Mathew Jose, and I hope you're walking away with a sharper lens on not only the real potential of HR, but also what HR should be and probably is. And Tony is personifies that absolutely in practice as a practicing leader. So on the other hand, if you are a business leader, ask yourself, are you using HR as a lever or just a label? And is your HR head on the table or outside the room when it means most? And if you are in HR, are you ready to think like a business leader? Probably, in my view, like Tony personifies, not just a function owner. And if this conversation made you pause, reflect, or even disagree, please put in your comments, ask questions, and tell us where you disagree. We would learn from that. So, Tony, last thoughts from you. I know this kind of topic never ends, probably, but yet, for the viewers, and what is your take from what we could cover in the last?
Thank you firstly for bringing up this topic. I think this is quite loud out there about perceptions of HR or perceptions of other functions. I think my take would be that we should strive to move away from biases, whether it be about functions, about people, and understand that everyone is out there to make a difference, contribute. We are all waking up in the morning, doing our work to be considered as good, to be considered as having contributed to the organization. Now, you may take up a role in any function. Sometimes I have believed that, for instance, the administration function is the least thanked, least appreciated.
Yes.
Sometimes they work the hardest.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Similarly, there are other functions like that. And there are other functions where people hold a grudge against saying that you do a little bit and there's so much of appreciation.
Yeah.
So it's a question of the choice and the profession you take. But let's respect, we all need each other for all of these functions. And each of these functions exists for a purpose. We are aware about it. So be a little more inclusive, accepting, and kinder to others so that we can make the workplace and the overall system a happier and more inclusive space.
Classically spoken, as an HR seasoned professional, Tony, and for a change, let me also be kinder. And I completely agree with you about, for example, the example that you gave about the administration not being appreciated. And in my working days, I used to tell my colleagues that just imagine when you go to the washroom and it's not clean enough, then you will realize what is the value that they actually bring in. Similarly, I think it is not just the question of HR. I think, despite all my efforts to provoke you or to kind of, tease you here and there in certain directions, you stood steadfast to representing what, in my view, is, the ownership of management, ownership of the larger purpose. And I think that itself is also related to the word that you use, inclusive. Now, if even young employees, the Gen Zs, millennials, whatever labels, if they go through a certain experience and they feel bad or not bad, not so good about certain experience, if they simply kind of think that if they were running the company, if they were running a certain function, for example, what would they do?
Yeah.
Okay. And that brings out those answers, which obviously at your state of life, not only career, comes, I think, very easily and smoothly and normal. So thank you again, Tony, for being Tony. And thank you for coming to my show. And for viewers, thank you again for watching and sharing our experiences. Do subscribe to the channel, The Missing Link with Amit, if you have not already done that. And most importantly, please put in your comments or questions for Tony and me or Vinay. And we would love to come back to you with new episodes, something that creates value for you and sets you to think, reflect, and act accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit.
Thank you, Tony.